At 8:45 a.m. yesterday morning, at Pennsylvania and Dumont Avenues in East New York, shots rang out. Francisco Bonilla dropped dead. Two buses were nearby, a children's school bus and MTA bus. Subsequent examination showed that they had gunshots inside those buses, but fortunately, nobody was hit in those buses. This just raises the question once more about the almost epidemic of violence that's going across the nation. And in certain neighborhoods in New York City, we have the continual tragedy of gun violence, deaths, maiming, families broken and hurt. What can we do? What are our faith-based congregations doing here in New York City? We're very fortunate here to have a special guest, Pastor Gilford Monrose. He is the head of the faith-based and clergy initiatives for Eric Adams, who's the borough president in Brooklyn. He's also the pastor of Mount Zion Church of God, and he's head of the clergy council for the 67th precinct. He is one of the most active pastors in bringing faith to bear on the public square in Brooklyn. And we're really fortunate to have you here this morning, Pastor Gil.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
What are you doing about gun violence in Brooklyn?
Yeah, that's a very important question. It's a very loaded question. It's a very heavy question. Gun violence is something that we think about daily. When you look at the amount of incidents in America that with gun violence, you're talking about 110,000. You're talking about 34,000 people who are shot and killed every year. Just recently, we heard that in Baltimore have reached the 300 mark in murders for the last 5 years. If you put those numbers together in some context, that will be about 1,600 young black, brown men and women who have been killed just in Baltimore alone.
What are you doing here in Brooklyn that can tell us, that shows us some clues about how we can be active in the face of this threat?
And so you're sure right about Brooklyn, and so bringing it back home is that we know that we have to respond because something that is at this level is a crisis. And so our fate would have to lead us to respond to a national crisis. But when you look locally, in each and every individual neighborhoods and where we pastor, where we have our churches, you have to respond to meet the needs of your community. And so what we have decided to do in the 6-7 precinct is that a group of pastors have come together to decide that there will be not one shooting that is going to go unanswered in our community. And what does that mean? It means a lot of different things. It means supporting the family members through the grieving process, the trauma process, helping our community grieve, going back out to the streets, talking to young men to not to retaliate, helping them get jobs, making sure that we can really help our community move forward with the healing process, having meetings, holding sessions with family members and those individuals who was once incarcerated, helping them to go back into the community, to be the mediators and the gun violence interrupters. So we have quite a few things that we're doing to kind of help us to reduce the violence in Brooklyn.
Is it working? How do we know it's having the impact?
So I would say, first of all, think about how you started off this tonight. You said that a young man, the age of 32, was shot and killed. Bullets rang out, and there was a school bus and an MTA bus, but no children were shot and killed. That is amazing. That to show you that even in the midst of this type of bad news, there's also good news that a young child didn't get shot and killed. Is it working? We would say, if you just take the numbers in Brooklyn alone last year, it was the first time in the history of when the NYPD records homicides was under 100 homicides in Brooklyn for the first time ever. If you look at in the confines of the 6-7 precinct, gun violence have been reduced by 67%, 65 to 67%. So we know that in Brooklyn, crime is stabilized, even though in other parts of the city is going up. But we can't take, I don't think that one individual or one organization can take credit for that. There's so many factors that we see helps with reducing gun violence, but I think that we are making a difference.
You know, I think it's often overlooked about how much the faith-based groups, and particularly churches in the city, how much they contribute to the welfare of the city. We have looked at what value do churches bring to the table, and it's between $200,000 and $360,000 of volunteer labor, space, offers in kind. If you add all of that up for every church in the city, it's between $200,000 or $360,000. That's nothing. Not nothing. That's a lot.
That is a lot.
And also, if you count in what expenses are avoided, like to going to jail, it's $99,000 at the state level. It's $136,000 at the city level. For some reason, it's higher.
Right.
And if they don't go to jail or don't go back to jail, you're saving $100,000 to $136,000 a year. Now, of course, it's not just about dollars and cents,
Right.
but that helps you to do other things with that money. Now, you have decided to pick on, or not pick on, but to really focus a large part of reducing violence and hatred in Brooklyn. How did you come to that task?
So it's just a particular area of calling where I serve in Brooklyn, and therefore most of my work, I think that in urban ministry, what we have to focus on is that the bulk of your work must be done where your church is located, right, for you to be very effective in ministry. And so you have to impact your local community where you are. And the question I always ask individuals is that if your church was supposed to close today, if it would close, would your community miss it?
Yeah.
So I'm focused on Brooklyn simply because that's where my ministry is located.
Have you, you say that you go out, the members of your group go out and counsel or hug people after this. Have you done that yourself?
Sure. I've been doing this for the past 10 years.
How do you go to somebody that's all torn up and offer to give them a hug or some help or some love?
That's the work of ministry. Hammers look for nails. We look for people who's hurting because we have a message of love and peace and compassion. And so we have to be where the people who need the love and compassion, wherever they are, we find them. That's just the way that it is because it's our ministry. That's what we do. That's what we are called to do.
Now, there's a lot of anger in that situation, so some people want to hit back, right?
Sure, and they do. Our job is not our job is just to love them, to listen to what they have to say, just to help them triage the pain, the suffering, help them understand what is happening at this point in time, giving them all of the resources that we have in our clergy council as faith leaders to that one particular family. We focus on that one particular family, and we allow ourselves to be used by God to help them through the process of healing.
Now, I know that you're talking about how to expand this type of process. So tell me a little bit about that.
So we try our best to, we took 10 years of experience, we put it into writing. We try to figure out what is the science behind what we have done. And so we've been successful in putting something in writing and now making an agenda. So we have trained 130 clergy from around the city to help them respond, react, prevent gun violence. What do you do as a faith leader in the city to help impact your community to reduce the violence? So we've been working in Queens. We're training individuals from the Bronx, from Harlem, from Brooklyn, of course. We have different precinct councils who have been asking us to help support them. They have been supporting us. I just came back from St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. We're doing some work there as well. I spoke to I texted the mayor of Baltimore this week just to give him some support and let him know that, listen, we are here if you need us, if your clergy need us. So we're trying our best to kind of just reach out and share what we have learned.
Well, now, you grew up in Virgin Islands. Your
Yes,
pastor, your father was a pastor there, right?
Yes, sir.
So what's it like? Did you ever have a conversation with him as, Dad, we have violence. How do you deal with the situation? Did you ever ask him about that?
Well, I never asked him about that, and he passed away a year and a half ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Yes. But I think most of my conversation with him and what I've seen in his life was about caring for those the voiceless, those who were disenfranchised, those who had no place to live. And I think that carried over in my life, looking at the people who have been, family who have been shot and killed, people who are in communities who have no voice, helping to lift them up in our community. So Even though I never had a conversation about the violence piece to it, I think that his life lesson that he showed us is definitely carrying over to this
So
type of work.
did you grow up wanting to be a pastor?
Of course not. Nobody wants to be a pastor.
Why not? Why don't people want to be a pastor?
You remember the story of Jonah, right?
Yeah.
God called him to go to Nineveh. He was going the other way.
Yeah.
So it's like us, you know.
This is when Jonah was called to go reach out to the people that the Jews didn't like. That was
Right.
the Babylonians or the Syrians, I guess
Right.
it was. And he says, no, not me, Lord.
No, I don't want to go that way. He went the other direction, and God had to take a submarine and take
So
him back
did you
to
go
Nineveh.
another direction before he brought you to Brooklyn?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of my mindset, yes, because I went to school. I went to Society College to be a journalist. I was trying to do something else, but not a pastor. A pastor? Who wants to do that?
And here you are.
Here I am.
Well, one thing that you have, you've got a whole list of things that you're doing and the Brooklyn Borough is doing. One thing that's related to this sort of epidemic of gun violence that you're working on is the that various groups, Jews, African Americans, Caribbean Americans, have been people have had hate acts toward them, and in fact, Brooklyn, I think, had its highest number, 93 anti-Semitic acts in the last year. What are you doing to help in that situation?
So that situation is complex. I'll tell you. I could give you like 2 examples. I think that number one, when people live on top of each other, because Crown Heights, Brooklyn, Williamsburg,
all of the groups are right there.
We all live on top of each other.
Yeah.
And so normally you would know that you commit the crime where you live.
Yeah.
And so I think one part is that people are committing crime where they live. Number 2, I think that we need a better understanding of the different cultures. And I think that is very important too as well, because when I see you as another person, as the other, but I don't see you as my brother or fellow human being, like on my same level, I think that also people lash out in situations like those. You have this compounding of all those issues. You have look at the national rhetoric about what is happening with immigrants and people who is different and not Americans or un-American. You have all of this chatter and this talk.
So
and
how
this
do you
move.
personally intervene in that? I mean, you have to deal with people that you're not used to dealing with.
Right.
Maybe you don't like them. How can you deal with them?
I like everybody. I'm a pastor, you remember?
Oh, okay. That's a good start.
No, I think that it's good for us because we have been working on this issue for many years. It just we didn't just start now. And my hope is that because we are working together as a group, as a collective, you remember we did a press conference with the Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams last week, along with ADL.
That's right.
The Anti-Defamation League, announcing that the ADL is putting in $250,000 into a school curriculum to talk about culture, different cultures in our community, so that we can sensitize our young people in elementary school to have a cross-pollination of ideas and culture.
Well, have you had much luck in bringing together the Caribbeans and the Hasidic Jews?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
of course.
how so? Give me an example.
You know Rabbi Eli Cohen
Yes.
and Davis, and they went out to schools, yeshivas, and regular schools, just talking about how they cope with one another.
You went on a
Jeffrey
trip.
Davis, sorry about that.
Yes, you went to a trip to Holocaust sites in Europe with a rabbi. What was that like? Did that give you a different sort of mentality about Jews in Brooklyn?
Yeah, it gives you, it grounds you. It helps you put in perspective their pain and their suffering. And so I went with Evan Bernstein of the ADL, and I said to him, when I walked into the Auschwitz, when I went into the camp, and I saw some of the ghettos, I told him it reminded me of the pain that I see too as well, being discriminated against. And so I could understand, the hurt, the pain. And so I think that it was very good for me to see it in Colin in person, what they went through, to look at the conditions it helped me put into perspective and context of their struggle as a Jewish people.
You know, you're dealing with a lot of different religious communities, and which actually has some importance for our mayor's race coming up next year, because it could be strongly argued that Mayor de Blasio became mayor because he won the Democratic primary with a lot of church support.
Right.
Almost a third of his support came from people that were real churched, very active. How do you see this coming up? What kind of issues should the faith-based groups say we want our politicians to address?
Right. I think number one, definitely equality in funding opportunities and resources in our communities. You can't continue to divest in our communities, give us failing schools, and expect that our children will not be impacted by it. So we want equality when it comes to resources in our community. That's number one. Number two, even in Brooklyn, when you look at Brooklyn alone, there are so many open vacant lots next to churches, next to houses of worship. We want the ability to have the mayor to understand, the next mayor to understand the need for these churches who have been through the crack epidemic, who have been in these communities when no one wanted to live in these communities, in East Flatbush, in Crown Heights, in Bushwick, who have been there in the beginning, in the Bronx, in Harlem. Now there's a revival. We want the faith community to have the first right on these particular land slots.
Let's stop there just for a moment, because it's a really big issue about church buildings, church space, but not only for churches and synagogues and gudaras and mosques, but that community space has been shrinking.
Right.
Because as you get gentrification, it doesn't so much push out poor people immediately, but what it does push out, it pushes out their community groups because they can't afford any space. How can the city start addressing the housing and community space issue of the city by working with faith-based groups?
Because the faith community, really and truly, when you look at the mission, is not to make money at the end of the day, regardless of what people said, right?
Yeah.
It's about saving souls. So the mission is for people. So if you give a nonprofit, a house of worship, property to build affordable housing, they're going to build affordable houses so that people can come in and live, not necessarily luxury high-rises, right? So it helps with the gentrification because houses of worship, if you give them the ability to develop these properties, will do what is right by our community to help stabilize our community and not allow just the upper class to come into those communities, but to allow those who have been here, who have been through the gunshots and who have been through when Brooklyn seed 1,500 murders in New York City across the board. So I think that your question is so important because if we can get the next mayor to understand that houses of worship can play a big and a vital role in making sure that we have affordable housing throughout our city.
Now, how about what other things are you in Brooklyn are y'all doing with the handle the houses of worship and their housing or architectural or building needs?
So one of the things that we have done is we have a program called Building Brooklyn Right. And
Building Brooklyn Right.
Yeah, you want to build it right. You can build, but we want to build it right. We don't want our city to become a soulless city, right? We don't want every church to dissipate and put in a high rise. So what we thinking is that if we can get these houses of worship to be able to, again, help develop and to rise and to help the city, with the city to build these affordable housing, I think we'll be on the right track.
Now, one thing that was very important for faith-based groups is that they could use the public schools and off hours for, whatever they're using them for. And de Blasio said as long as he's mayor, that the faith-based groups could do that. Are the current crop of candidates going to say the same thing?
Well, they should. In Brooklyn, we asked the mayor for hardship money for nonprofit groups throughout the summer and throughout the year to be able to open up the schools longer for faith-based communities. I think the first initial pilot program was about maybe $500,000 to $1 million. And I think that is now up to about $2 million. I can't totally remember the number, but I think it's around $2 million.
This is coming to the city or through Brooklyn Borough?
Well, Brooklyn Borough Hall, the Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams had asked the mayor to start the pilot program in Brooklyn, and so it's coming through the city, though.
What does it do in the summer?
It opens the schools so that nonprofit groups can use the school building.
For summer programs.
For summer programs, yeah, and the city having to be able to cover the cost for the janitor to open the school. We'll cover the cost for nonprofit organizations.
Do we know how that worked last summer? That's when it started?
So we just ramping it up. It was a pilot program last summer. So this year we're looking at a lot of more applications.
Did it work this summer?
Yeah,
it sounds like you didn't have enough applications.
Not we didn't have enough. It was like a pilot program.
Right.
But now we are. I think it's going to be great. I think it's going to be a good help for nonprofit organizations. Small nonprofit organizations who have been doing great work need to be able to have the resources to continue to do the work.
Now, you're in this office called Faith-Based and Clergy Initiatives. Is that an old office in the Brooklyn Borough, or is it relatively new?
Well, it's relatively new. This was the first office that the Borough President Eric Adams created when he came in, when he won his first term a few years ago. So he asked me to come on board to help build it, develop it. And so I've been there ever since, working with him to develop this and bring it to full capacity.
Now, it does strike me that this year, you've really increased the amount of things you're all doing. I mean, innovations in different things, ranging from, one that starts...
sermon, right?
Yeah, it's a sermon. You call it Sermons for Safe Streets.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I've heard sermon illustrations for parking.
Right.
The Reverend Rich Velotis in Queens likes to say that when you're coming to church, you're always looking left and right and say, where am I getting parking? And say, God, please give me a place, and please not make me so angry.
That sounds about right.
What are these sermons for safe streets?
So basically, what we don't realize is that in New York City, we just have a high level of deaths with motorists, with bikes and babies in strollers. It seemed like there's a war between people who are driving and people who are riding bikes and walking. So Sermon for Safe Street is that we are saying as faith leaders is that we have to consider that a life loss is a life loss. And we can't use a car as a weapon. And what we need to do is that we need to tell our parishioners over and over again that driving, you have to take your time, you have to be patient, you have to show love. Give people extra time to cross.
Well, how would you put that in a sermon? I mean, would you say, put on the brakes coming out of Egypt? Or?
Well, that could work too, is that, with the chariots, you got to make sure that you stay on the right side of the road and keep looking and just be courteous to one another.
Are any churches taking this up?
We started to. We did our first meeting. We had about 20 faith leaders who came into the room to talk about the fact that, listen, we want to talk about accidents. We want to talk about safe streets. We want to talk about how we look at cars and bike in the city. We want to look at how we're traversing back and forth. So, yeah, we're taking this up, definitely.
Speaking of your borough president, Eric Adams, he made some news this last week, or rather former Mayor Bloomberg made some news and met with President Adams to talk about some police policy that Bloomberg had advocated and now has second thoughts about. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
You didn't use the R word, right? He repented, you saying?
Well, it sounded like it when he went to a church to give a speech.
Right.
And
in Brooklyn, he went to Christian Cultural Center.
Christian Cultural Center.
So listen, I think that apologies, some people accept apologies, some people would not accept apologies. I think that at least the conversation is now starting up again. To see that there is some level of, we have to recognize that there was injustice done to the African American community, black and brown, young boys, young men, even women in this city. And so I think that it is now raising the conversation again. Don't forget that people said, if you go do with stop and frisk, we go into total anarchy and chaos in our communities.
Yeah.
They said that with stop and frisk. Now we're looking at bail reform. We're looking at reforming the justice system. And it's the same set of things again. Oh my goodness, in January we're allowing all of these prisoners to be loose in the streets. We're going to the abyss of anarchy over and over again. And I might say to you that there are some people who's going to come to us 10 years again and say, you know what, I want to apologize for saying the same thing.
But let's take a look at this bail thing.
Yes, go ahead.
880 people in the Bronx released, including 2 murderers.
Right.
That we have on camera, at least one of them, murdering somebody.
Right.
How is that a good idea?
Okay, it's not a good idea. Now, in the law system, you know that there are people who go to jail and they're totally innocent.
Right.
They have a judge, they have a trial, they have jurors. The cases are fabricated against them.
Yes.
That's a miscarriage of justice.
Of
right?
course, of course.
So we do know that we don't have a perfect system. You know, those of us who are rich and wealthy, we don't have to spend a night in jail. We can pay our bail. But I just wanted to say this to you is that is not the test about releasing someone who shouldn't be released. It's about releasing the people who should not be in jail. And I think that we should continue that as well throughout the year.
But it seems like we're moving like a system that, well, it's so many, we just sort of blanket let everybody go.
Yeah, but these are not people who have been sentenced and is in jail. We are releasing people who's waiting to see a judge.
You know, Pastor Gill, we've talked about a lot of your innovative actions in Brooklyn. I wonder who you think is running for mayor this next year. Who are the likely suspects?
So I heard that the Brooklyn Borough President, Eric Adams, is running.
Yes.
The Bronx Borough President, Ruben Diaz, is running. The Comptroller, Scott Stringer, is running. That's what I've heard. So
who is, or do those address the faith-based community very much, any of those?
I think they're all three in their own right to move around the city as much as they can and address faith leaders.
It seems like the Borough President Adams is doing the most, though.
Well, he's the only one who have hired a director of faith-based and clergy initiatives. So.
Well, who are the dark horses, do you think?
I am not too sure. Let's see.
Yeah.
But I think that it probably could be female with some experience, maybe younger. I think that would be the dark horse.
Well, audience, thank you for tuning into a journey through NYC Religion TV. We covered a lot of things that we want to cover even more deeply, and we'll hope you will continue to show your support to us. Thank you very much.